Democrats requested the National Guard be present around the Capitol for Biden's inauguration this week. Once that was over, they decided that they had used the National Guard for all they needed them for, so they decided to send them packing into a parking garage where they were neglected. It really shouldn't surprise us, though. Democrats have operated this way for quite some time. You're listening to the Closet Conservative Podcast. This week, the mainstream media kept showing us pictures of National Guard troops that were brought to Washington in order to help provide security for Joe Biden's inauguration. Now, there were reported threats of violence. The FBI released several statements, and so they decided these extra security measures were needed to keep the politicians around D.C. safe. The U.S. Marshals even deputized 2,000 National Guard troops ahead of the events. There were images of these men and women who were sacrificing away from home in order to keep these people safe. They were sleeping on the floor of the Capitol, and it was around the same area where many Americans stand in line for their tours and tickets when they go to the Capitol to see the history and the events and different things around D.C. The pictures were surreal because it looked like our country was more of a military state than a free nation. The Democrats throughout the event took advantage of these military members. They threatened them as they reported they were going to screen them and find who were Trump supporters that were in the group, because those might be dangerous. They might be offensive to Joe Biden. They might cause problems. They threatened them. They used them to keep these elitists safe around D.C. as the politicians feared another angry mob. But instead, the inauguration went off without any problem. Not one single issue. There were a few protesters, but there were no events that caused any concern or any security issues. And once the event was over, the need for the public presence of the Guard troops was no more. So what did the Democrats do? Well, they decided to banish them to a parking garage. Yes, the men and women who were forced to leave their homes to protect those who believe they are better than all other Americans, they were forced to sleep and rest in a cold, concrete parking garage. That doesn't seem like an ideal spot for a U.S. military member who should be at home in the United States. Representative Madison Cawthorn gained a lot of attention in a video because he went to where the troops were, and he took them a couple dozen pizzas. He offered the troops that they could sleep in his office rather than that parking garage. He didn't just talk about it, he went there. In these conditions, they were despicable, and they're ridiculous because they're in the United States. This is not Afghanistan. But they were being treated like they were in a foreign country rather than at home. It was not until later that Democrat Chuck Schumer said, "We'll get to the bottom of this." Now I want to ask, do you see the difference in the response? Do you see the difference in the treatment of our U.S. military members between the two? One went there to apologize and help fix the problem, and the other just said he would look into it. That's the difference in the response from the left and the right. That's the difference you get from those that realize their role and those that believe they are better than you. But we really shouldn't expect anything different from the left. This should be what we've come to expect. They've done this time and time again. We've seen them operate in this manner, in this use you and lose you mentality for quite some time. You see, last year, they needed the coronavirus pandemic. They needed it to help push the lockdowns to help destroy the economy. They needed these Democratic governors to step up, force people out of their jobs, force people into unemployment to help them defeat President Trump in the election. Because it was going to be almost impossible to defeat President Trump if the economy stayed strong. They also needed Black Lives Matter, and they needed Antifa, those violent protests, to help push a narrative. They needed to try to argue and say President Trump was a racist. They needed to try and argue and say that President Trump was out here as a white supremacist and his supporters were racists. That's the narrative they needed. They've used other things as well. They've used people in the abortion movement, the pro-life abortion argument. They've used people I've talked and shared many times before. Even in the Roe v. Wade case, the woman that was used as that case has regretted being part of that. The gender equality movement has been used as well. They'll sit here and say we need to be equal, we need to provide equal treatment, we need to be able to allow men to go in the women's bathroom and women to go in the men's bathroom, and one of the 42 genders to exist on any kind of document. But then they'll put it back in the closet when they're finished with it. Each and every time they use an argument, they take a minority group or a small segment of society and they use them. And then once the fire dies down, they push them aside until the next time they're needed. This is not a congressional problem alone. This is not just a problem you see just in the House and the Senate, but it's a problem on the entire left. President Joe Biden raised eyebrows this week when he put a bust of Cesar Chavez in the Oval Office right behind his desk. Prominent position. In the photos you see of Joe Biden in the Oval Office, you see this bust behind him. Some of the mainstream media celebrated this, but they must have memory issues just like Joe Biden. Chavez may be celebrated by some, but he was abusive toward immigrants and a socialist. He was known for calling immigrants degrading names, and he even called immigration services to have them deported. Chavez may have been celebrated by some Latinos, but he was not a friend to all Latinos. Many suffered, but that's the left for you. It's all about how you can help them. You see, they pander. They pander to groups, they pander to sides, use you, they exploit you, and then they're done with you. Biden panders yet again to the left with this bust of Cesar Chavez while he's disparaging many others. To the left, this is just a game. It's just about using someone to get what you need. It's an elitist mindset that you are better than anyone else. It is sickening, no matter when it happens. The treatment of people like this, it is absolutely ridiculous. It is sickening, and it should never happen, especially by those who are elected to represent Americans in Congress. But it's even more disgusting when they did this to those who are willing to lay down their lives to protect Americans. See, these people are willing to lay down their lives. These members of the National Guard, they're willing to go to foreign countries if they're called upon. They're willing to go fight to retain our freedoms. They're willing to go fight to protect our nation. They're willing to go to D.C. to protect elitist Democrats who then are willing to shove them into a parking garage like they're a useless old car. It's disgusting, and they deserve better. Have a great rest of your weekend. We'll see you back here next Saturday. The Closet Conservative Podcast is a production of The Liberty Loft. Copyright The Liberty Loft 2021. You can find more shows and information on our website, www.thelibertyloft.com, or on any of our social media channels. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, leave a 5-star review, and share the podcast with your friends.